starts going, and then we'll start this. Yeah, like I actually really liked it though. I still liked it. Like it wasn't just. I know it wasn't as good as the first one, but
I should have let the Rudy scene go on longer.
Borat 2 was Borat doing Borat. You know what I mean? It's kind of meta.
Yeah.
And the folks seemed to know they were in a Borat movie. Didn't you get that impression that they were doing kind of like looks at the camera, and it lacked that candid surprise feel of the first.
Yeah,
maybe to some extent. Like, but I mean, Giuliani definitely didn't. Anyway, let's begin. Welcome everybody to another episode of Professional Novice with Ali A. Rizvi. My name is Ali Rizvi, and this may be our last live stream during the Trump administration, or it may not be.
Maybe not.
Maybe not. And that's exactly what we're here to talk about. So there's a lot of. Mark Halperin had in his newsletter, his excellent newsletter. He was talking about how this is just a traumatic stress disorder without the post. It's just the 2016, people are just absolutely terrified that, 2016 is going to happen again. And yes, the election, we're doing this on Sunday night, and the election is on Tuesday night. And it's Trump versus Biden. All three of us are liberals. Both of you are American, and I think both of you have already voted, right?
I have not. I'm doing it on the real deal day. I'm a swing state voter now, and I moved here, and I was extra paranoid. So officially, you have to be a resident for 30 days to vote legally here, and I made it by 33 days. So I was just I'm not taking any chances. So I'm going on the real deal day. Yeah.
Yeah, I voted on the streets of New York, 13th by Avenue B.
In person.
Stood in line about 4 or 5 blocks long. More a symbolic gesture than anything else, it being the ultimate blue state.
Yeah.
Good reason that neither candidate did too much time here, which probably makes a lot of strategic sense, but it's good to represent.
Yeah, so both of you guys are libtards, right? We are.
So
big time libtard. And so it's good to be transparent in that kind of fashion. I will openly profess to being a bold and brash libtard, but at the same time, I'm the one here who's terrified my own gut feeling that a lot of the optimism is perhaps unwarranted. So let's discuss that.
Yeah, let me just explain that to people who haven't seen the previous stuff that I've done with you guys. So, we have Spitz, right? And that's the guy who's talking about being terrified. He is a strategist who I've worked with a lot in the past. He briefly consulted for the Andrew Yang campaign, and he thinks that Trump will win. So previously, he has been talking about both campaigns from a brand strategy perspective, right? And he's saying that just generally, if you look at the brand strategy perspective, forget about the polls, forget about the data, all that stuff. It didn't bear out in 2016. So, right now it just looks like Trump is on brand and Biden doesn't really have a coherent message. I think, am I summarizing that okay for you?
It's essentially it's not Trump versus Biden, it's Trump versus anti-Trump. So everyone is talking about Trump. So it's not Coke Pepsi, it's Coke versus the Uncola. And that's not particularly viable or exciting way to present yourself. And I think that it lacks the energy to really take it over the top. So that's the essence of my emotional position around this.
Yeah. And in the other end of the ring, we've got filmmaker, the director of Islam and the Future of Tolerance, an absolutely excellent documentary, and just a really, really talented artist, I think, Jay Shapiro. And Jay Shapiro, we did a previous live stream where you're pretty confident that this is going to be a loss for Trump.
I'll set it straight that I'm also terrified, but maybe for slightly different reasons. I'm not terrified that if they count all the votes, Biden will win, but I'm
Right.
obviously terrified of the nightmare scenarios that I'm sure we'll get into, of the legitimacy of it and all the challenges and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I mean, just like my initial response to Mookie is the anti-Trump is good enough this year to win. But we'll talk about what the tea leaves that either of us are.
And that's fair. And I'll put a little addendum to my own terror that it's by hook and by crook. So so it's a dual terror kind of stance where I feel that there's going to be shenanigans before, during, and after, and that will clearly contribute to the pandemonium and the conditioning of lack of faith in really the foundation of democracy, which is our open and fair elections. Okay, so that's a big problem.
Yeah, let me start with the Mark Halperin newsletter I was talking about. The reason that I'm talking about that is because I think that just when it comes to the Electoral College and the math, he has provided, I think, the most persuasive path to victory for either Biden or Trump. So he talks about the significant 6. So there are 6 states. There's Iowa, North Carolina, Florida, Ohio, and then 2 others, Georgia, and there's one more.
Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
No, Pennsylvania was on the next tier, right? So he had these
Michigan probably.
Yeah, so he had 6 states that Trump absolutely has to win. And he says that if he loses even one of these 6 states, even one of them, then just politically and mathematically, the election's over. So those are the 6 states. I'll confirm the list of it. After he wins these, he still isn't over the fence. So that gets him to 247 electoral votes. After that, he has to win Pennsylvania. And so now he's won Florida and Pennsylvania, right? But he still isn't over the 270 threshold. So then he has to pick out one other state in addition to Pennsylvania. And that's how he's going to win. Judging from the polling data, right, from the battleground states, which has been actually very stable compared to 2016, it doesn't seem like that's going to happen. Only in 2 of the significant states is Trump actually leading right now, and he's leading by like 0.2, 1.0, that stuff. Oh, sorry, the 6th one was Texas. That was the other one. Where the most recent polls are showing kind of a statistical tie for all of them. So that is just in terms of probabilities. Nate Silver from 538 has said that the highest chance that Trump has is maybe around 11% of winning. Now, that's not an insignificant chance. I mean, the reason we go around wearing masks is because we want to avoid chance of getting COVID, which is probably less than 11% in many cases. So it is something that, when you're talking about something that we're terrified about, Trump could really actually.
Well, that's a good flush draw in Texas Hold'em. You got a nice suited pair in pocket, and you got a couple of the suit on the board at the flop. That's looking good. What is that? Anywhere from 11 to 16% chance. I'd go for it.
Okay, so Spitz, hold on. So I want to start with you because I think that Jay and kind of are more aligned on this, and we differ, which is why you're here, which is great. So I want to ask you, based on that data, that path, do you agree with it? What do you think of the polling? Do you think Trump can actually win all of that and get through? Just purely on the basis of being on strategy? Is everyone buying into the strategy, even if he's on strategy?
Well, we can, we could point into the minutia of each individual states. We could dial up, go more broad. We can talk about the 6 prerequisite states. We could zero in on Pennsylvania as being the ultimate flipper. Florida early on, during the course of the election evening, will be a major indicator. If Trump loses Florida early and the counts are coming in the quickest, apparently, from Florida in a definitive kind of way, and it looks like Biden took Florida, then it's game over, guys, before anything proceeds from there. So I think we could take a couple steps back from just tossing numbers around and arguing about standard deviation in polls per state, because that's an endless argument, and it's somewhat of a tautological circular argument because there are a lot of variables, right? Is the 3-point spread more significant? What's the cutoff between what we think is pretty much a certain win or loss? On and on and on. And way smarter people, more quantified people than us are debating this. And I'm not sure it's a useful piece of our time. I think taking a broader look in terms of the energy that's underpinning each campaign. Once again, I look at this from an emotional point of view. I look at this from a messaging point of view. So I agree with you completely. From an analytical point of view, Biden seems to have this in the bag. To your point, 10, 11% is not really substantial. It's not really significant. Is it a risk? Yes. But I look at it very, very differently than just by the numbers. I look at it in terms of the emotional underpinnings of what each candidate represents. I look at Trump as an amazing, non-repeatable phenomena, a little bit like Ron Jeremy in pornography, right? It's once in a generation that you get an individual who seems to be so eccentrically well-suited to embody a role which breaks all models, completely transforms in a genre, an industry, or a political sensibility, and has such a capture vividly of the imagination of both sides of this country that electrifying, memorable presence in and of itself changes all the rules of the game. And the reason I'm sitting here, and again, I'm not advocating for a Trump victory. I think the guy really is a maniac who's done tremendous disservice and harm to this country. But I nonetheless fear that we have this tacit complacency based solely on the numbers that this guy's going to be defeated and that we're going to usher in a wave of rebirth in this country when 45% of his base aren't just the MAGA maniacs, right, who've turned him into a cult figure, but Trump represents a lot more than that. Trump is an expression of this country that goes back to its origins. He's the John Wayne, right, of this country. He's the Dirty Harry. He's the tough guy that people like. They feel the strength drawn from him. And it's that kind of symbol expressed in this almost perverse, extreme kind of way that makes me think it's not game over. We're spending a little bit too much time on the analytics and the metrics and not enough time thinking what not only he's done to the country in terms of emboldening and bringing up that sensibility, but what it means moving forward and ultimately how the Democrats have or haven't reacted to that essence expressing itself in this kind of way.
So we'll get into the Democrats' reaction and whether the Biden brand is, whether he's on brand or not. But Jay, what Spitz said, like let's focus not on the analytics as much, but really look at that. You had the WWE analogy, and I know that you talked about it previously, but can you kind of summarize it? Because there are some parallels.
Yeah, it's not quite John Wayne in my mind. It's very much, as you said, Donald Trump, but the WWE character. I think it's much more of, I'll tie this together because I think there's something in the analytics itself, 2016 more so, that is important to actually talk about with what you said, because I think if there was something in the phenomena that we missed in 2016, right? Everyone's afraid. There's sort of this myth that the polling was like way off. It really wasn't, but it was a bit off. And there seems to be some evidence that it was off in a way that reflected a number of shy Trump voters, right? People who were afraid to admit to pollsters or even their friends or whatever that they were going to vote for Trump. But when push comes to shove and they're behind a booth and no one's watching, they pull the lever for Donald Trump. That could have affected it. And what I think is important now is in 2020, I think because of the experience of 2016, there are no really shy Trump voters anymore. I don't think that part of the data is going to show up anymore because I don't think people are afraid to admit. I mean, they're in the streets now. There's not a lot of shy. It's been normalized in a way to say that you support Trump, to find arguments to support Trump, or even if they're anti-left arguments. But
you're tacitly assuming that to be the case.
No. There's nothing.
Nate Silver agrees with you on that.
Yes. No, there's nothing in the. I think the onus is on you. Like I think to back it up, like you said about we're not the professionals in this. It's professional novice, obviously. The onus is a bit on all of us to investigate if this goes the other way. If you're right and Trump wins, we have to seriously talk about reassessing maybe you have it right, but reassessing our engagement with how we predict things, how we
absolutely.
Absolutely. I mean, if that happens, if they count all the votes and it turns out that Trump wins like 52%. That's sort of the end of polling, which we could talk about.
Well, again, it's the critical swing states, like Ali mentioned. I think Biden will win the popular vote by more than the 3 million Hillary did. It might be 5 million. It might be 6 million this time. But it's the critical swing states that count. You know, that part of the strategy no one can test. Yeah. But if you are talking about pundits, the Trafalgar folks look at it as much more even a spread. And they do bring up issues, not so much the shy Trump voter as the defiant Trump voter. You got the deep, hello, who is this? It's the deep state calling. So it's not just being shy, but it's an expression of that emboldenedness that you mentioned. It's a fuck you president. And they're saying, fuck you to pollsters. And there's a general distrust for media, government, science, authority. That's part of the Trump brand. And there are key issues about polling methodology. And I don't want to go too deep into it. But it's not just a phone call. Hey, buddy, who you voting for? Right. It's an extensive list where they collect a lot of demographic information, right, to conduct the multivariate analyses that they do. And it could take 20 minutes. So that already is a selection mechanism. And I know that they've got error correcting, especially after 2016. But if you are bringing up the expert point of view, there are experts who are alleging at this moment that the overall polling methodology is flawed.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, I mean, that's what I mean. Like, we can talk in circles around the polls for a while. If you're a Democrat and you got your fingers crossed, Biden all the way, we need to take back this country, then of course the polls are right. If you're a Trumpster, you're like, it's like, I'm kind of on the fence with it. I'll be the first to admit, and I'll be happy as you guys that this guy loses. But I'm hesitant based on my gut and based what I sense and based on a broader understanding of what's actually going on when they're taking the metric at the presidential level. You know, for 2018, they were quite on, right? I think, again, and related to Trump, and this is what I brought up initially, he's a non-recurring exceptional case. And an individual like Trump who breaks all the rules could very well break the rules of the polling methodology.
So there's two things I wanted to talk about here. Well, first of all, let's make it three things. The first one's really quick. The biggest difference between 2020 and 2016, people say 2020 is not 2016, is in 2016, people weren't running around terrified with PTSD about a previous election where the polling was wrong. This time, everybody is. So even people who are looking at the polling and saying, okay, yeah, this is a shoo-in, Biden's going to win, even these people are, because the answer to this is, are you terrified? Are you confident? A lot of people said we're both. Like, we think he's going to win, but we're still terrified of this thing happening again. That part of it didn't exist in 2016, right? The second thing is that it's turnout. One of the biggest things about, and I've said this over and over again, is that Trump, the number of votes he got in 2016 was less than Dukakis in 1988, was less than Romney in 2012. So he had the record. The turnout was like at a record low. Right. And this time it's the opposite case. I think it was Ohio, or I think I was seeing one of the states where 2 days before the election, they have already reached, just with the early voting, they've already reached the total number of voters that they had in 2016. So the early voting numbers are absolutely insane.
No, they're through the roof. They're
through the roof.
Yeah. More people have voted early than everyone voting in 1996.
Right. And early voting this time, I mean, it's kind of, this is sort of, there's a consensus that early voting favors Democrats. I mean, the chances are that, because Trump's been talking about.
Our boy Nate Silver denies that, but that doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem right? Of course the Democrats are going to come. Trump's just spent 2 months disavowing himself of mail-ins, right? And basically saying that the whole system's corrupt. So for his minions, right? It's corrupt,
right? So and then so I think that was a second thing, right? Now the third thing is that in this battleground polling, right, that you're seeing now, the difference between this and in 2016 is that Biden is polling at 50% or above in a lot of these places. Now that wasn't the case with Hillary Clinton. There were third parties that were taking away some of the vote from one candidate, both candidates. There were a lot of independents, right, who broke later on for Trump. This time, you can have, if you're polling above 50%, right? If you got more than 50% support, even if all the independents turn for Trump, they're not going to get past that. I mean, you're past 50%. It's not going to work. So, Jay, like, what is that part of what's giving you confidence, the stuff that I talked about, or are there other factors as well?
No, the confidence is the polling. Like, what else could what else can any of us look at? But the terrifying part is it's not even that Trump is a unique character. It's that this year is such a unique year that it's, if anything was possible to just say like, oh, like nothing matters this year. It's impossible to poll a population during a pandemic with any kind of accuracy. Then yeah, like throw it all out. But it would be a weird error if all of these things would converge in such a way to show such a clear Biden bias. I'm sure there's some explanation that could explain it if it turns out that like all of these polls are so consistently wrong. But it's possible. I don't know what it is. I mean, the big correction, we've mentioned it, of like what they improved from 2016 is they've weighted more for education. Like that's been well sought out. That they thought the correlation was income, but it's very much education. So they've weighted that much more this time. I mean, everyone sort of understands how polling works. It's like trying to estimate in a huge bag of M&Ms of what the color breakdown is, and you just grab a handful off the top. You just have to sort of extrapolate and do the math. But if you're more likely to have greens at the top, then you count them less. And we all like know how that sort of works. And they're weighting, but it's hard to build in a pandemic into all of your models. So it's that the part that terrifies me is less of the Trump, because I think polling, and I hope we can talk about sort of just that. I think generally polling is awful for democracy. This is not my argument, but someone like Joe Lepore is terrible as an engine for partisanship. We can go into the history of it. I think this is all awful that we're drowning in polls all the time. But there is sort of a science to them, and they're fairly predictive. So yeah, what's giving me confidence is that, and what's terrifying me more so than Trump is actually COVID, because I think as you keep pointing out, Trump's not new anymore. And I think the shy Trump voter is not very shy anymore. There's like husband and wives who weren't telling each other who they were voting for last time. I think those days are done. You've had 4 years to sort of slowly come to terms with the fact that you're a Trump voter and you're willing to admit it. And now some people are wearing the badge proudly, or just sort of have justified it in other ways.
Yeah. I think it's even more than that. It's a sense of, American exceptionalism is based upon privilege and defiance. And no candidate, I think, in our lifetimes embodies that sensibility of privilege and defiance as our boy Donald.
But also, one thing to put in there as well, Mookie, though, is we keep talking about, as you point out, we talk about Trump more than anyone else, even when we all don't like him. But the Hillary Clinton factor, she was also a potentially unique, unrepeatable phenomenon of someone who was uniquely hateable to this kind of subset.
Oh, absolutely.
And we don't have that. Joe Biden is not a hateable person. Kamala Harris is the one that, frankly, of all of like the events of the last couple months that scared me the most, it was when he selected Kamala Harris as his VP. It was the one I hated the pick. I was terrified he was going to make it. She, as I brought up in like the WWE analogies, she's the one who can be a wrestling character that you want to body slam if you're a Trump voter. Biden doesn't fit the role. Kamala I thought it was risky and scared me, and every time she like tweets some crap, I didn't see what she was talking today.
We're discussing the pick. Amy Klobuchar seemed to be a nice vanilla pick for boring, and then the soccer mom, the soccer mom in.
I mean,
and it's just
the fact that the Trump voters and even like his minions are trying to scare you with it's really President Kamala is the real plan. I mean, it's revealed. They wish they were running against her, which is close. They badly wish they were running against AOC and the squad and all that. Joe Biden, I was skeptical at first, has really, as I said last time, to me turned out to be the perfect candidate to put against Trump, because you can't land a punch on the guy because he's genuinely a nice dude. All you could do with the Trump voters is say that he's some sort of weak pushover. He won't stand up to the left. He'll die in office. Kamala will come over and usher in some awful dystopian future. That stuff might be able to get them riled up, but no. So I don't know. To answer your question, Ali, like that's what's giving me confidence. Again, we're all looking at the same polls. It's the best we could do. What else? What else can I look at?
In the last debate, I think Jay, you tweeted when Biden said that when he was talking about the radical left, Trump was talking about the right. He's like, "This is not. I am Joe Biden. I am the Democratic Party." Okay, this is not the radical left. This is Joe Biden. And then you said, okay, that's it. That's pretty much, that means that he won this debate. But one thing, when we talk about polling, all right, so Spitz, like I want to ask you, there's different things that we find from polling. Right? So you talk about brand strategy and all of that. How do you find out a strategy is working? And we've both worked together on this stuff, right? So how do you find out it's working? How do you get you use the analytics, right? You get responses through polling, through this kind of data.
Well, here's what's frustrating is if you have a consumer product, how do you know your brand strategy is working? Well, what's your market share?
Well, your sales,
End of day, right? It's the bottom of the conversion funnel. The problem here is that the bottom of the conversion funnel for a president happens once every 4 years, right? And
you don't find out.
And then that's it. The rest is just predictive. So that's the spot everyone is in right now.
Right.
And those, from standard deviation to errors in core methodology to eccentricities around certain segments of the electorate, I don't know. What I go is my gut feeling that we've never had anybody even remotely like this guy. Off the charts. Okay. Now you guys are saying that Uncle Joe, if you have Thanos, Trump-nos from the Avengers, the destroyer of worlds is Trump's brand, right? He actually has already killed a certain percent of the population thanks to Corona. So the analogy with Thanos is I think really good, right? He's the fuck you president, fuck you government, immigrants, globalization, trade, America first, right? The destroyer. They love it. That's been his brand clearly. In opposition to that, we have Uncle Ben, Uncle Joe. With great power comes great responsibility. He's the mentor. He's the uncle who comes to give you empathy and support, right? The perfect foil for this destructive, paradigm shifting maniac, right? Who's throwing a Molotov cocktail right into the three branches of government. We come, establishment guy, we got it. In opposition, everyone gets it. But what worries me on a gut level is bad guys are so much more exciting than the good guys. Everyone loves Darth Vader.
Entertainment perspective, but
but entertainment is politics.
Is politics, One thing about polling, right?
Okay. Hold on with the polling. I'm trying to steer us into an emotional conversation.
But you're doing that because the polling is 90 to 10. That's why you're doing it.
We even having this conversation then? Let's all go home. It's like 90 to 10. What the fuck are we talking about?
Exactly. The onus is on you to explain what could possibly be so wrong about it.
If you give me 1 second, I am going to explain it. People love the Italians are nice folks, right? From noon until 3 p.m., Rome shuts down. 2,000 years ago, they had an empire that spanned half the known world, but now they're pretty chill. Benito Mussolini comes up, right? Embroils them in a horrible war, right? They're not killers, they're lovers. But they love the fascisti, a guy on the balcony frothing at the mouth, waving his arm around, right? It makes you feel good. It brings out energy. So you have this guy on stage next to this frail senior. That's what I saw during the debates as well. I had this guy who not only got the coronavirus, but he got over the coronavirus, and he's fuck you to the global pandemic. And he's standing there in front of how many people watch the debates? 80 million people. And he's defiant, and he's on fire, and he's cogent. You can't diagram his sentences, and everything he says is a lie, but I could feel the energy. And then next to him, you got Joe Biden. And Jim Carrey does a great job of Joe Biden on Saturday Night Live, right? He nails it, right? But that's part of the dilemma here, and why I think Trump has more of an advantage than Biden does on this gut innate level. That if you look at this man, right, for all of the madness and zaniness, there's obviously a magnetism to it. And on a gut level, you look at Uncle Joe and you're just kind of like, okay, I feel okay. I think you'll be better for the country. I feel better that you're there for us. But if you look again at the electorate and you look at the base, not only of the MAGA maniac, but you look at the general electorate of the people in a time of a global pandemic, everything is disruptive. You're looking for a source of strength, of energy, which will calm you down. It'll make you feel good. That's the power of authoritarianism. That's the draw of Trump, which is like, I know he's a maniac. I know he's lying. I know that he lies, cheats, and steals, but I think he might lie, cheat, and steal for me. He hates the people I hate, and there's something about him. But I like this guy.
So I want to say one thing. Like what you're saying, I think applies very well to 2016. Right? I actually think that was
saying it applies now.
I know you're saying that, and that's why I'm disagreeing with you here, right? And ultimately, and so I think Joshua has a comment here. He's saying unless you're wrong because Trump starts in the polls.
Yeah.
So the thing is,
like, no one disagrees with what you just said, Mookie. But the onus is still on you. Then and I'll give you some possible answers. Like you said, maybe you brought up Trumpers are strategically and systematically ignoring pollsters. Possible. I guess, in all of these states, in every place where he's losing, the polls are so to what extent the polls are so drastically weighted towards education or something, and it was a huge mistake, and they shouldn't have done it. I don't know, or polling is just impossible now. We all know there's problems with polling. For people who are listening, you can random call a landline. You can't random dial a cell phone, so it tends to skew. There's a lot of corrections that have to be made, and maybe the whole thing is just broken. Is this like, you need to actually give us a hypothesis? No one disagrees that there's a magnetism to Trump. Clearly, there's a magnetism to Trump, and clearly people are fascinated.
Fifth
with
Avenue,
him.
Could shoot anybody.
He could do. He's known it himself.
He's already killed extra 200,000.
He surpassed his own number. He's testing it out.
Right.
I mean, my entire last thing with Ali was about the Trump character in WWE being such a brilliant thing. He's still trying to play it. Clearly, he's played The Apprentice guy. Like, I don't disagree with your sort of brand, back of the book description of it all, but the onus is still on you then to be like, unless we have to talk about polling. I know you don't want to talk about polling, but you have to explain. And if it happens that Trump wins this election, and we should talk about all the shenanigans that go on, because this is going to get fucking weird. We all know that. But if we count all the votes and he wins it, I'm going to be sitting there thinking, I'm going to have to explain that. And we're all going to have to explain that, of like what went wrong here. And the branding stuff will have to have an analytical explanation at some point. It's not, you can't just say that he won because of the poetry. You have to say the polls were so wrong, and either the industry is horribly broken or some of your hypotheses were right. Like the poetry led them to XYZ. We have to be able to talk about social science and polling as a somewhat legitimate, although I think problem.
Well, but all your points will be retroactive, though.
I'll need to be.
And the couple points, though, I will make to just address your question.
Can I say? Let me just. I want to jump in with one thing, because I want to bring this into the whole polling conversation.
Okay, great.
So polling isn't just about predicting who's going to win and who's leading and who's. There is another aspect of polling, which is polling demographics, right? Seeing what the patterns are. So Jim King here is saying, I'm not seeing suburban women going for the fuck you guy during a pandemic who has no comprehensive health plan, who says he hopes the Supreme Court will end the ACA. So this is the thing. Suburban women, right? Which is, Trump has been trying to get them. He's like, suburban women, please like me. I don't know if you guys saw that.
Yeah, of course. That was great. So on brand, right? On brand. Who would say that? Oh, please.
I'm wondering if the brand is, even when you have brand competition, it's like there's one brand that does get a majority of the market share. You can be totally on brand and still lose. I mean, that's the point. So the thing is, and you win once and then you lose the next time. So here's so it's not just suburban women, seniors. The seniors are going blue for the first time in decades.
Right.
They almost always vote Republican. Right?
That's because someone they know died.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Someone they know is dead because of this guy.
Someone they know is dead. So that defiant thing you're talking about, coming up, and initially his plan was his plan was to rip open his jacket and he was going to have a Superman logo there. And you read about that. Right? I mean, I'm not bullshitting. This is
I'm just bummed he didn't do it. I wish he would have done it.
Yeah, he would have. That might have been. But I don't think for a lot of the seniors, when you have people who have died to the extent that they have, and disproportionately high number of seniors who know each other, and this thing has hit nursing homes, it has hit like cruise ships and the places where seniors hang out, right? It's just not the kind of thing that he can be on brand all he wants, but it's just not the kind of thing that I think is, at least the data is showing. And to me, even intuitively, you're talking about the emotional aspect of it. Let's talk about the emotional aspect of it, right? I'm 70 years old. I live in a nursing home. The average person who lives in, say, New York City or any kind of major city who's younger may not, very possibly you don't know somebody who died of this, right? But if you're a senior, you most likely know, 235,000 people and counting, most likely know somebody.
And you're scared. You're actively scared of it.
You're scared. So you're
scared.
Not. You're. I don't think, even from an intuitive gut level that you're talking about, if I look at this guy who 2016 may have seemed appealing, right? He's going to bring America back and all that stuff. But now, like after 4 years of seeing him in action and all of the stuff that he's done, and with all of these deaths, I'm looking at this guy ripping off his mask and barely, trying to breathe on a balcony, looking like Mussolini with the jowls and everything. Like it's just not something. Even intuitively, forget about the polls are showing this not working, right? But it just, even from an emotional gut perspective, like you're talking about, it's just not the brand. I'm like, okay, if that's Coke, I want to go for Pepsi, or I want to go for the non-cola. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I get it.
So that aspect of polling, the demographics, and the ones, the kind of groups that are actually breaking for Biden instead of Trump this time. What do you think about that from an emotional perspective? Like some of these specific demographics.
I'm in 100% agreement. So the seniors who are scared shitless know people who have died and are fear for their own lives, right? So recognize that this guy's recommending that they take bleach, has no clear plan, right? Okay, so that's point. Check.
Yeah.
Right. The suburban women concerned about their families. This guy is a maniac on every level, healthcare and the like. Check. With the suburban women, though, this was assumed after the Access Hollywood tape in 2016. Again, and not to cite deja vu again, but there was a tacit assumption that Trump had just lost the women of America. And what ensued was that all of these women, fairly predictably, voted alongside their husbands. And they just did. They fell to Trump in a surprisingly predominant way. Now, a lot has changed since 2016, and I'll buy that. And the polls, to your point, are indicating, to the point where Trump's on the podium and, with no humility whatsoever, asked them for their vote back again. So Trump himself knows, he's looking at the numbers too. But my question, though, and this is why I'm harping at that emotional frothiness, is how much do these factors offset the fact that you have an incumbent Darth Vader? And not only with regard to the MAGA maniacs, but you have a whole swath of the country who do like the Republican agenda. And although it's deviated from it radically in traditional terms, you just have to listen to Morning Joe, and he'll be the first to remind you that Trump has nothing to do really with core Republican values, everything from deficits to a long list, right? But there's a huge swath of America, and I can personally attest to this too, people I know who side with Trump, acknowledging all of these weaknesses, yet hanging on to the vision that Republicans are better at leading this country, are terrified of going backward to an Obamaesque sensibility. And I'm wondering, just to the point, and the polls are indicating differently, but I'm just wondering, in terms of that energy, in terms of that general Republican ethos, he's a maniac, but he's our maniac. And he actually won, right, when Romney and McCain were defeated. And we don't care. Let's bring him. We want another 4 years. It has taken us so much hard work and effort to finally get the keys to the Oval Office. And we're not going down. We're not giving this shit up. And then infusing the base with that and the halo effect of that kind of enthusiasm. So a more accurate question then becomes, does the love of Trump or the love of what has been created so far in terms of this polarization outweigh the hatred of Trump and the contempt for everything that he represents? I think that that's a more meaningful question. It's not as nuanced. It doesn't have the segmentation breakdown that the polls afford, but I'm just coming at this from a more emotional and gut level. And as to why the polls aren't really revealing this, I mean, you know, to address Jay's specific point, there's a huge degree of new registrants for Republicans, right? Hundreds of thousands of newly registered Republican voters. I'm not sure how the stats, and all over the country. And there's been an incredible grassroots initiative on the local level for new registrations and excitement for the GOP, specifically for Trump. Now, when the numbers break down, will those offset these losses in these key segments for the emotional, intuitive reasons that you cite? And so, I don't know. I don't know. That's what you're asking me. I don't know. But that's the essence of my point of view, is I'm agreeing with you that the polls indicate a Biden win. And in fact, it indicates a Biden landslide. I'm hesitant about that based on everything I'm saying now, which is I have a hunch that the zeitgeist of this country got really excited by this guy. And we might find him abhorrent, but there's folks who love the guy. And if they don't love the guy, they're at least comfortable with the guy to the point where they have energy and enthusiasm, which might outweigh all these factors at the polling booths on Tuesday.
Yeah. So, Jay, I have a question for you before I would just want to bring in Dulce Barbosa, Dulce's comment. So she's saying, what was so wrong with the Obama era? When you're talking about them saying, okay, we don't want to get this too Obama-esque. I mean, Obama did win twice in electoral landslides, right? I mean, so that's one factor. But I wanted to ask Jay another thing. So let's talk about this emotional side of it. Forget about the polls. Let's talk about rally attendance and the enthusiasm and everything. So you're in North Carolina. Do you see a lot of Trump signs, yard signs, and things like that?
I'm in Asheville. I mean, it's very split. Yeah, we
Asheville
definitely.
is slow blue, dude.
Yeah.
Get the fuck out of here. That's like Austin.
You drive 2 minutes in either direction, in any direction, and it's Trump signs in very MAGA country. But like, downtown Asheville, it's like a little micro Austin.
Yeah.
But I wanted to address some of Mookie's points because he said a lot, and on the emotional aspect. Again, we'll see what happens when people voting is just another day of polling, frankly, but it's the one that counts where people actually go in and check the box.
Right.
So we'll see what it says out of there, but I can't find good data on the breakdowns of parents and mothers in particular and I'm very curious if we're going to see mothers of boys, young boys especially, breaking away from Trump this time, because there seems to be a gut level and maybe some anecdotal evidence at this point. We'll see what the vote says of that gut level. Like you keep casting Joe as this like boring, nice, empathetic guy. I think that's a gut level. There's a lot of mothers being like, I kind of want my son to grow up more like Joe Biden than Donald Trump.
Absolutely.
And I think that there might be a bit of there's some hypothesis that there's some shy Biden voters who might be wives of Trump voters in the suburbs out there that might break that way. So I wouldn't, yes, again, Mookie, no one's disputing that there's a lot of Americans who clearly love the excitement of Trump and the fuck you of Trump. I wouldn't discount, again, the 2016 Hillary. No one felt that for Hillary Clinton. There was very few people being like, I sure hope my daughter grows up to be Hillary. Maybe some, but I think a lot of it was a bit forced. Hillary was a bad candidate against a very unique person in Donald Trump. Joe Biden is different. I think he might pull the emotional levers for Joe Biden are a bit stronger than I think you're giving it to. His brand as being, my fiance keeps saying like, oh, we're voting for Mr. Rogers. That's a good fucking brand, to be honest, for a lot of Americans out there. And a lot of people who, Uncle Sleepy Joe, these are compliments. These are absolute compliments, especially in this era. So I wouldn't discount them. We'll see how that all breaks out there.
It's strategically intentional, actually. The boring aspect of it.
Ali and I discussed this.
But let's let Jay go on. Go ahead.
Well, I'm not sure which point you wanted me to pick up.
So can I ask you about one thing? So you're talking about, you said something about shy Biden voters. So I want to actually, I've been like, there's a friend of mine that I talked to in Texas who's saying that he lives in a neighborhood there's a lot of the reason I asked you about the Trump yard signs. lots of Trump yard signs. You see that swarm of trucks, the Biden trucks, like on the highway that we're trying to not Biden trucks, Trump trucks, that were surrounding and ambushing this, the Biden Harris campaign bus. So he was, and he told me this some time ago, but it only clicked when I saw that highway swarm today, right? Of the trucks. Is that he said that there's a lot of people in this neighborhood that are voting for Biden, like they are, but we're not putting up yard signs because we're scared that our homes are going to get vandalized.
Yeah. So literally a friend who was just over here today, actually in South Carolina, has this exact story. She lives in a pure Trump area with like a Trump family, and does not put up a Biden sign because of that same fear. She doesn't want to be harassed, or there's absolutely the inverse of this problem happening. Although if a pollster called her, I don't think she would, be ashamed to admit she's voting for Biden, which I think happened, 4 years ago. I wanted to bring up, because I wanted to, again, zoom out. I like to sort of live in the philosophy and sort of philosophical and psychological level of these things, of why I think the shy voter doesn't exist now and did 4 years ago. And it's these conformity studies that I cite often. If anybody looks them up, they're famous from the 50s. Solomon Asch, if you know them, he's a famous psychologist who did these really cool and very like candid camera style conformity studies, where the way they worked is he would have, it was a really simple visual acuity test. So imagine like one line labeled like A, and then 3 lines of different lengths labeled, like A, B, C or whatever, or like 1, 1, 2, 3. And it was really simple. You just have to say like, which one does one match? Like this line here is the same length as A, B, or C. And the really simple tests, like, 5-year-olds get 100% on them. And it would be
person,
8,
woman, man, camera, TV.
Yeah,
that's pretty good.
It would totally be on that test.
You did as good as Trump.
Yeah, you nailed it. And
I still remember. Long-term memory.
And so the way it would work is you would be telling the subject that you're doing a visual acuity test, and you'd walk into this room, and there was 8 other people. Actually, I think there was 8 total. So the 7 other people who were taking the same test. Unbeknownst to the person, the 7 other people are actors, and they're all in on the plan. And so the first few times they all answer the same one. They're all like, it's number 1, number 1, number 1, number 1, and the guy says number 1. And after like 2 or 3 times of answering the correct one, they all in a unanimous fashion say the wrong one. They're like, oh, it's 2, it's 2, it's 2. And then the person who's actually being studied, looks over being like, am I fucking crazy? So at first, a lot of times they would start being like, it's 1. They would say the right answer. But after a few times, you would start getting them actually just conforming to what everybody else said. And it's a huge effect. So what he found was like the error rate on the control group is like less than 1%. Like everybody gets it right. But when you do this conformity test, it goes up to like 38%, where people start actually lying. But the weird thing about it is when you interview them after, half the people would say like, yeah, I don't know. Like, I think they were all crazy. I just sort of wanted to be part of the crowd. But half of them actually believed it, being like, no, I'm sure it was 3. It was sure it was 4. And this is a psychological finding about conformity you could push all over the place. Now, of course, to the shy voter, when you could play with this experiment in so many different interesting ways, the one that's the most interesting is, of course, people, the one subject was told, like, you can write down your answers. You don't need to say it out loud. And when they did that, they were 100% right? Like all of the other people would say the wrong answer, but they would write down the correct one because you weren't announcing it to the crowd, to the people sitting next to you. They would never find out. And so the conformity bias went away. This is such a good analogy for what it points out a lot of the problems of polling, how it actually influences us, right? I'm sure you've all seen this, right? Like we keep saying Biden is way ahead in all the polls. Like this, and Biden advertisements, I'm sure you've seen them. Like I don't use Facebook often, but I was using it to like check our messages. And I would get these Biden ads that pop up that all say like, it's a dead heat, give me money, right? Like Biden is winning in the polls, but he is telling you, he's putting out his own like fake polls that want to convince you that, you know, it's 50-50 or I'm losing by 1 point, give me money. It's like a coach saying play the game like it's tied, even though you're blowing out the other team, because you're trying to sort of get this thing out of your mind and play your hardest at all times. So it's like, but that I think happened to a fairly large degree in 2016, that people were giving into conformity bias when they're sitting next to people. But when you're actually voting and doing it in private, you write down what you think is true, which is Trump is the best candidate 4 years ago. I think that's gone now because now it's blown up. We all are sort of out in the world. We all see Trump. It's been normalized in a way. And I don't know. Again, we'll see. Mookie, you just brought up another potential explainer, which could be a good one, of why the polls could potentially be this wrong, which is just they didn't wait in a surge in new GOP signups. That's another possible thing. Again, all of these are totally possible, but again, the onus will be on you, and again, will be on me to be like, holy shit, like how could we have gotten this one so wrong?
I get it. And there's also the emotional inversion though, rather than shyness, which is active defiance. It's again, as I mentioned, it's the deep state calling. Fuck the deep state, fuck the government, fuck immigrants, fuck everybody.
Raza just put this up too.
Right.
And again, like people have this gut feeling that it's closer than the polls are showing. I don't know. We have like an epistemological conversation to have here about what the fuck does that even mean that you have a gut feeling that it's closer, other than like, great, it reveals that you're scared. Cool. So am I and all that. But like, how are we supposed to engage in the world of what other people are thinking out there, unless we are just going to say polls do not fucking matter, which I'm okay.
I'm not saying that they don't matter. I'm agreeing halfway at least that they're indicators. Okay. But again, it's like, why are we even having this conversation? We're having this conversation to what? Make ourselves feel better or express various opinions as to why the polls might not be actually reflective of what's actually out there.
So
and most significantly, just really finish real fast, is we're all thinking guys here, right? So it's not just about the polls, whether they're accurate or not. And it's not even about who's going to win or lose November 3rd, right? Or 2nd. Mm-hmm. It's about the overall zeitgeist and the feeling as to why we're here right now. And clearly the country is in this existential crisis. We've never been more polarized than ever before. We've got this guy who's just a paradigm buster in every way you can imagine, who's in the Oval Office. And all these norms are shattering all around us. So a bigger question, and this goes back into the emotional underpinnings and that gut that you're talking about, Jay. What's that gut feeling? Why even are we talking about our gut? Because at the end of it, that's all we got. And that's what's fueling this whole thing.
Is it all we got? Is it all we got?
Yeah. We do have it. So I want to bring, so you know what Russ is saying, this is actually so when he's saying that the race is much closer than the polls show, and so I'll tell you, Mookie, I mean, he's probably more aligned with you on a lot of things. We talk about this stuff a lot, behind the scenes.
Represented.
Yeah, represent. So the polls are actually there are some states that are showing like really wide gaps, and I think Nate Silvers also said that the races are closer in some states than the polls show. So in some places where it looks like
what the fuck does that mean? What does that mean?
So what he's saying is like where you have because his model, like what the 538 model is, it doesn't just take into account the polling. It also takes into account previous trends. It takes into account
to a certain extent.
Right, all of that stuff. So what he has done, I think he's one of the few pollsters who very consciously does try to incorporate that gut. And this, you're familiar with him. He tries to incorporate that gut aspect into the polling as well as he possibly can. Of course, that's, how do you do that? We don't know. But it is actually possible that it may be closer than it is, but that is where that's where this whole thing is very different from 2016. Very different, because 2016 national polling numbers, Hillary Clinton went into the race with, I think she was 3.2 points ahead, and then she won by 2.1. There wasn't a lot of room. But if you have polling that's showing a 10-point difference between Biden and Trump, and supposing the polls are wrong by 5 points, and you come down to 5-point margin, you're still
but in the states that count, it's much more narrow. And Nate admits to this too, that in the battleground states that are the decisive states to tip it, it's much closer. And there's a correlation between the closeness in the polls, even according to all the stats that most people agree with, and the general level of education and the demographics in terms of being white people. So in the states where you've got less educated white people, which also happen to be battleground states, it's much, much more narrow than in the other one. And but even Nate says that too, which is an adjunct of what you were talking about. So what about the standard deviation there? If it's is 3 points, 4 points significant?
You would just have to go on a run on 10 of them in a row. But
There's some states, right, that can actually tell you information about other states, right? So you have Kentucky, and then you have sort of southern Pennsylvania, right? Southwest Pennsylvania. You have similar voters. They always kind of trend the same. So, for example, in Iowa, if the race is tied and it's very close, Iowa is something that Trump won decisively in 2016.
Right, he kicked ass there,
Right, so you see the election results come in and you see Iowa's actually around 50-50. You could break either way. Then that will tell you that, okay, the polling in Michigan and Wisconsin was probably those gaps, like the Biden lead was probably real if it's tied in Iowa. So there are ways to just looking at demographic trends, you can tell where the races are close, what that means. So again, let's do this again. Like the one thing that we do know about factually, right, is the number of electoral votes that each state has. So you have Iowa, North Carolina, Georgia, Texas, Ohio, and Florida. These 6. All 6 have to be won. If the polls are showing like 50-50, even if it's like really, really close in all of these, what are the chances that Trump wins all 6? And by the way, even if he does win all 6, he doesn't win the election.
Yeah,
but
very, very, very low.
If he loses Iowa, he's lost the election. Like it's not. Can I
to Mookie's point, because we could all look at the polls, but instead of talking about the poll, why this gut thing kind of worries me, and why the hunch thing kind of worries me, and why that talk worries me is because this is not going to be a normal election, and we know that because of all of the factors going in, the legal shenanigans that are coming. I worry about, you're talking about the zeitgeist and stuff, that if people out there are really convinced that this thing is way closer than they think it is, or Trump really won, or like they just don't believe that Biden has this big lead if we just counted everything. And Trump, we know Trump is going to claim he won, it's just all fraud and all that kind of stuff. I worry that is going to feed into the kind of, I don't know, confirmation and desirability bias that people have for wanting their hunches to be sort of confirmed in the world. That, oh yeah, I knew it was actually not so easy. I knew Trump was really going to try to win, because we're talking like the crazy thing about all these states, and I've been getting deep in the history. I don't know if we'll have time to get into the whole thing here, but we're all going to hear a lot about the Compromise of 1877 for the next month. So if you want a primer on sort of what that is, I recommend reading it. And the Electoral Counting Act of 1877 that was in response to 1876 disaster with Rutherford B. Hayes, with the only time where someone won 50% or more and wasn't seated as the president. It's insane. It's terrible. And if you read through it, it's pretty frightening about how much leeway individual states have to fuck with the way they count these votes after November 3rd. People forget, and Cass Sunstein wrote a really good primer on it. It's only about 20 pages. I recommend everyone find it and read it. But people forget that we have 3 election days in this country, not 1. There's November 3rd, where we all go out and do our little polling thing. And then there's December 12th, it is this year, which is the day the electors go and cast their vote. And then there's January, where the Congress affirms it. The second 2 are usually just
pure formality.
Yeah, pure formality. We're done. They just follow those things. This year is going to be a different year. We all remembered Bush Gore in 2000 when it wasn't quite that way. In 1877, the legal challenge is you can change the rules of if there's a dispute within a state, because the truth is we don't have a national election here. Every state holds their own election, and they have pretty much the leeway to do it however the hell they want and basically call whatever they want fraud within the state. And then the state gets to decide with a ton of leeway. It's called the safe harbor provision in the act, which set of electors they send to Washington for that actual vote. And they get to as long as they don't pass new laws and change the rules in the game 6 days before that day, all is fine. So all this stuff you're reading about Texas trying to throw out votes and all this kind of stuff, this kind of shit is actually quite frightening. And when you trace it all back, it was 1877 with this ridiculous, I mean, history will remember it as like the worst compromise, but the compromise of 1877 basically for the Northerners, which were Republicans at the time, to get Rutherford B. Hayes the presidency, they gave the states an incredible amount of leeway over this, including removing federal troops from the South, which ended Reconstruction and fucked blacks over in the South for another like 50 to 80 years with Jim Crow laws. So it was a terrible compromise. All of this for Rutherford B. fucking Hayes. Like, it's the terrible, terrible trade. But we're stuck with it now, and you're going to be hearing. But to wrap this back into that hunch thing, I as much as I'm confident that if you count all the votes, Biden will win, or as confident as I could be given the polls, let's just leave it at that. This hunch thing worries me because I also don't think we're going to know who won on election night. We all know news agencies are going to be very hesitant to call it this year. Maybe Fox will jump the gun and do some stupid shit. Who knows? But I don't think we're going to go to bed on November 3rd knowing who won with any definitiveness.
Chances are pretty much zero.
Pretty much zero. And we're going to get a week of this kind of stuff, maybe a month, maybe several months, where we're going to be hearing again all this kind of stuff about 1877 and crazy shit like this. And I just worry that the hunch that it was actually closer or that Trump really was going to win, people are going to want to disbelieve, if they're really sold on that hunch, are going to be, I don't know, less likely to believe that, hey, actually it looks like Biden won if we just count all this stuff. They might be more willing to believe some of this fraud kind of stuff.
The longer it goes on, Jay, the longer it goes on, the more time there will be for them to cook up stuff, because the longer you have it, the more uncertain it seems.
Trump has already market conditioned.
No, he has
everything he's done pays this scenario. It's 100%.
But I think it's working.
Victory on the night on November 3rd. He will announce victory.
Probably,
regardless of what the result is.
I think all of that work he's done is not just playing into sort of his base, but actually, I mean, I won't cast aspersions on you, but planting this hunch in people that wouldn't normally be there.
See how powerful this guy is? He even he
but why are you letting exactly like why like that hunch shouldn't be there? You say all we have is our guts. No, like that's the Trump line. That's the Trump brand, is just lead by your gut. You don't need the doctors, you don't need the science, you don't need the data. Look where it's gotten us. Let's actually try to get back to some sort of semblance of, we have our guts. Of course, we always have our guts, but we are at least trying to conjure better than our guts, engage with the world in some way. That's all I'm trying to do in this conversation with the polls. But the gut is going to play a huge role in the post-election chaos with the guts, because it turns out that you're like the gut of just wanting to. I mean, if anyone goes back to the 1877 thing, that electoral commission, they had a compromise of who was going to be on it. It was 8 Republicans and 7 Democrats. You won't be surprised to learn that the vote came down to an 8-7 vote in favor of the Republicans. You could call that like a nonpartisan thing, but of course, our guts play this huge role in who we actually want to win. So anyway, I worry about the guts playing a really, really destructive role on every level. And it's going to be the state level. We're focused a lot on the Supreme Court and Amy Barrett. It's unlikely to be that way. The Supreme Court, as you've already seen, just keeps kicking it back to the states. That's all about 1877. They have the power. It's going to matter what states play around with this.
Yeah, we have around 24 minutes left, so I want to just read out one or two different things that audience members are saying that I think are really good. So John Harris is saying it's not about whether Biden wins or loses. It's about how the U.S. reacts to what Trump will try and pull off after voting day. If Biden wins, Mr. Trump will try to negate the win with lawsuits based on false data on the vote
100%.
He's already doing it. He's
already set it up. 100% agreement.
He said we're going to send in the lawyers. Now, and then he goes on. He says if Biden loses, Trump will double down with a barrage of legislation to cement a right-wing administration for at least the next 4 years. He's going to be even more empowered. He's going to have even more political capital. He'll have this this mandate now, with a legitimate.
100%. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So that's one of the fears, and I think that I don't think the counting and everything is going to go on for more than a week. I don't. I think that all of the individual governors, and especially in these battleground states where the lawsuits and everything are likely to happen, they're working with the DNC to actually take extraordinary measures to make sure that all of this stuff is taken care of.
There's a difference between counting and then, okay, go ahead.
Let me just finish this point. So, what happens is that because he's primed, as you said, Mookie, that, he's primed everybody to go against the mail-in votes or fraud and everything. So because of that, the longer this goes on, we don't have a result. Right. The more a lot of people, it gives the illusion of uncertainty. Mm-hmm. Oh, that means it's up in the air. That means it was really close. That means we don't really know. Even if it may not be, it just may be that, there's even if every mail-in vote, right, is for Biden, it just goes on for a month before all those votes are counted. And they're like, oh, Biden won in a landslide. It would be like bullshit. Mm-hmm. Like, we heard about this before. And so there is, I don't think that they're going to extend this beyond a week. I'd be really surprised.
Well, the point, I apologize for interrupting, but the point I was making is that most of these governors are going to count all the ballots, but they'll be set aside. So, for example, if there's a lot of contested argument as to the validity of mail-in ballots, if they're postmarked before, right, and if they arrive late, will they be counted? So some states, yes, some states, no, and some states are still in the air legally. Mm-hmm. So they're going to count all the ballots that come in and then set them aside, right? These are the ones that came in postmarked. These came in late, but they were postmarked earlier. Do we count them or don't we count them? And it's still up in the air in a lot of these states. So to your point, Ali, in a week, everything's going to be counted. But the real question is what's going to count. That's probably going to go on.
No,
that
could go all the way
up to the Supreme Court.
He's got to win. If Biden wins, he's got to win by at least 5 points. He can't. The margin has to be big. It cannot be like a 269, 270, 268 thing. It just can't be. Because that happens, then even if Biden wins the popular vote and the Electoral College, he's lost the election. We've got Amy Coney Barrett. Like that cynicism, I absolutely share with you.
To your point with the governors, just back to the 1877 thing. I mean, what actually happened that year was 3 states. I'll get them wrong. Louisiana and Florida, of course, were 2 of them. I forget the third one.
It's always Florida.
It's always Florida. Even then, it was still Florida. They actually, it was such a heated. By the way, that year, 81% of the eligible voters voted. It was like the biggest turnout we've ever had. People were like super into it. Wow. But that year, those 3 states sent 2 sets of electors to DC, one from a legislature and one from a governor that disagreed. The governor said, hey, that Republican won, and the legislator said, hey, the federal government was like, well, yeah, they sent both because they both were just fighting, be like, count this one. And it was a legit constitutional crisis because there's surprisingly very little in the Constitution about how to do this whole thing.
Did the Supreme Court settle that at all? The Supreme Court of the state?
No, they set up this ECA. They set up a council that I said that was supposed to be nonpartisan, and it was 8-7. And then they, in response to all of this crisis, they passed this thing, the Electoral Counts Act. But it's totally insane. This is the thing that gives states like an insane amount of rights. But basically, there's some wiggle room in it. I'm not a lawyer, but it's not. It's a pretty dense piece of thing to read. A lot of people, like scholars, just hate it as it is. But it gives a lot of power to the governors in particular. And so to the question of like how we respond, it's going to be, as we know, a really tense time. I don't know where this is all going to focus on particular states. I mean, you could see somewhere like Michigan, which already we know, the governor has this tense relationship with the legislature there. There's going to be claims, to Mookie's point, of half of the state legislators saying we should throw all of these votes out that came in late, or curbside voting is illegal, or whatever. Frankly, they can do whatever the hell they want. The states have to decide this, but the governor has a bit of a final say, a little bit in that leeway. But the lawyers are lined up on both sides to argue this thing either way. Supreme Court is not going to. They're basically going to kick it all back to the states. We don't have to worry about Barrett so much because there's just really not a lot in there for the federal. It's why you're seeing this crazy thing that every state is doing it differently. We have 50 different elections on that day. I guess 51 if you include DC. We have different elections on that day, and they're all governed individually. That's not election day for America. Election day is when the electors go to DC on December 12th this year, I think it is, and say what the state decided to do. So how we respond, how we respond in that window. I mean, the question's a good one, of course. Like, what do we do in that time is going to be obviously just an insanely tense time. The nightmare scenarios I have are things like assassinations that just get like out of control. Like those are the things that obviously could spark an insane level of violence. What's going to be really, really hard to do is to keep our heads on straight, because I don't know how you guys are feeling, but I'd be surprised if there weren't a handful, at least, of news stories from Election Day that are really shitty, like bad, like someone getting either beaten up really badly at a polling place or maybe even someone getting killed. That's very new for our personal experience.
Like the trucks on the
someone's
highway.
Going to do something really stupid, and someone's going to get hurt. And we're going to all, as a country, have to. The really crazy part of this, and again, like I'm curious your thoughts, Mookie, of like, it's fun to talk about Trump these ways, but actually, there's like a seriousness to the way he responded with the tweet to that video of the car saying "I love Texas" and all exclamations or whatever, all caps. Like, if that's a preview of what the response is, just imagine, play this out in your head. Something terrible happens on Election Day. Someone gets hurt. We see the news. It just like makes its way out there. How we respond and looking for a leadership to basically say, like, everyone keep your fucking cool. Don't retaliate. Don't go out and beat someone up on the street, versus what Trump will say about it is a very, very scary thing for me. I mean, I could see it escalating in a way that is quite frightening, but I have zero doubt that Joe Biden will say the right thing and mean the right thing. Like, if God forbid something awful happened to Trump, like an assassination attempt, Joe Biden would visit the dude in the fucking hospital and do the right thing. I don't know if that's true in the inverse, which is fucking crazy.
Well, here's a little bit.
Joe Biden might be the only one who visits.
Here's
good
a little.
Joe, right?
I mean, just to think about a little kerosene to add to your match there, at least hypothetically.
That's exactly what we need.
The police unions of the United States, 291,000 officers strong, are in unilateral support of Donald J.
Yes.
So when you're dealing with unrest locally, regionally, or even nationwide, the people who are here to enforce law and order and to keep the peace are unanimously on one side of the political aisle.
But I wanted to throw just one more thing into the thought because, again, I was saying, like, none of us are used to that. We just haven't seen that kind of thing in our lifetime. But actually, I don't have the exact number. It was something like the late 1890s was the first time we ever had an election day in this country where someone didn't die. Like, this used to be normal that there'd be fights and someone would die. We can't, if that news story comes, and it's likely coming, unfortunately, something like it, we can't overreact and call it civil war. Like, we have to actually. We will, but because of this gut thing of like, oh shit, but actually, like, even if it's a murder or a terrible fight or some awful piece of video that goes around, we have to remember, like, that's a localized incident and not a civil war. And we have to prevent it from getting to be a civil war, of course, but like, that's up to us. It's a good, like, how we react, no matter what happens here, it's up to us to not freak the fuck out. And try to keep it cool.
Bill Maher did a wonderful job with his new rule ending with, let's skip the Civil War and get right to reconciliation. And again, it was a brilliant point of view, which is there's no such thing as a red or a blue state. It's all just shades of purple. And he said, oh my God, my dry cleaner is behind enemy lines. What am I going to do? So this idea of a civil war, this idea that Texas should secede from the Union when you've got millions of registered Democrats there, or conversely, you've got 5 million registered Republicans in California, it just doesn't make any sense logistically. It's not like there's a Mason-Dixon line separating Americans. It's a marbled, complicated, infused jambalaya mess.
It's not complicated, though. It's just cities. It's cities and non-cities.
Well, it's
that's the story.
It's the liberal elites on the coast, the liberal coastal elites.
It's Toledo, Ohio is blue. You know what I mean? It's not just the
Houston,
coast. Like,
I get it.
Which is why Civil War doesn't work either.
That's the point I'm making, which is like this idea of Civil War is just not really tenable, and I think we are terrified of the violence. And you're talking about this gut feeling leading to a lot of the confusion is duly noted, and I appreciate that. But I'm not coming at it from a point of view of being a rabble rouser or freaking people out. And I'm not here to downplay who I think would be a superior choice to be president. So I think it's tacitly understood who I voted for on 13th Street. But what I'm trying to express, though, is the larger feeling I think that we all share, is that we gotta figure out how to fix this. We need to learn how to communicate more civilly to each other. And I think that the infractions made by the right are mirror reflected in a lot of the problems of the left. And this bubbling up and this myopia is a mirror phenomena. And I think as liberals sitting here right now, zooming each other up, we have our own implicit biases. And what I'm really trying to point out in my kind of gut feeling is that this swath of the country who is effervescently excited about, or at least putting up with the current maniac in the White House, is a reflection of ourselves. And we need to get to the point where we understand and accept each other, not in terms of a Hallmark greeting card kind of cliche, but really start to be able to communicate with each other so that we don't wind up where we are right now with this highly polarized, supercharged, utterly disruptive environment. Because the thing is, we've now learned as an electorate and as a country that a maniac populist who does whatever the fuck he wants just to get elected, who is on brand to the point of further polarizing the general message and sensibility of this country, could ascend to the presidency. And just like Trump did it for the right, we should anticipate a very, very similar phenomena eventually happening for the left. And we try to be high and dry and say, no, we're the party of values. And to your point, Biden would be the first to wish Trump well if anything terrible happened. When he got the corona, he was like, I hope the dude gets better, right? And meanwhile, Trump's mocking Biden for wearing a mask. So we think that we're better. We think that we're value driven. We think that I hear it all the time. As liberals, we're on the right side of history. And that's equivalent to a deplorables comment. That's equivalent to saying that the rest of the country does not have a legitimate voice in the history and trajectory of the United States of America.
You know, one thing you're talking about.
It's frustrating. And I won't go so far, but we have ourselves as much to blame for the situation we're in right now as the complacent, sycophantic, ass-kissing GOP. So we can call hypocrisy all we want, but where did we drop the ball?
Yeah, I think that, when you talk about the unity, if people do want to come together and have a more civil conversation about these things, I think that's actually another place where the Biden brand is, whatever you think it is effective, because his coalition is united against a common enemy, and it's actually really broad. You've got Trumpers. You've got all of these generals who worked with Trump, they're ex-cabinet members of the Trump administration. And then you've got the far left squad type people. You've got the Kamala Harris people. Everybody is all of these people with this incredible sort of ideological diversity are all under this kind of Biden umbrella, or
the Lincoln Project folks,
right? Lincoln Project, the Bulwark, everything.
Joe Scarborough.
So I think that idea of choosing unity over division as part of his brand actually does play out. I mean, he chose. You guys are talking about Kamala Harris. I disagree with that. I actually like her, but he actually chose somebody. The fact that he chose a woman who called him a racist in the first debate, right? Essentially, is that okay? You disagree with me, you can call me a racist, but if I think they're the right person for the job, I'm going to take you. Like this, that idea that he has that kind of broad coalition is, I think it's effective, and I think people do notice it. A lot.
Talking about John Kasich is potentially in his cabinet, I think is great. All that kind of stuff. I mean, I wanted with the partisanship and this polarization and trying to come together too. I wanted to throw, I sort of hinted at it early, but polling itself under the bus, because it's part of the reason, and some would say a huge reason of why we are so polarized in the first place is polling itself. I'd love to try to imagine a world without any polling at all. I mean, imagining sort of like scenario A, where it's like you don't poll, you just vote. I think would be an interesting world to live in. And
blind. Right.
Yeah, and the history of it. I mean, I have like all these notes here. The history of polling. The first time a news commission, ABC, commissioned a poll was 1975, and it started this explosion. And now it's normalized that news agencies themselves are polling. I already brought up the Solomon Asch things. The polling as a way of to sort of bring in the Noam Chomsky of manufacturing consent and manufacturing something is an interesting way just to sort of talk about it. But also, and Mookie, you know this from your world in brand strategy, you discover a lot through polling, because if you ask people a certain question a certain way, you get a certain answer, and you want to know how they ask that question, because then that becomes part of your rhetoric that you say on the campaign speech. Because the truth is, when they started this crazy polling stuff, we had actually, the candidates were so closely aligned that they were desperate to find something to actually run on that separated them from something else. Something like abortion was never even a partisan issue until they found, ooh, this is the thing where they disagree, and you poll people on it, and then you just tear the country apart on this polling. The fact that if I didn't know at all how anybody of my neighbors might vote just by having some random polling data in my head, I don't know, I might have a more sort of like genteel attitude towards my neighbors. They might have a more genteel one. We start to assume things about people because we walk around with all this polling data in our head. Ali, I don't know if you saw this one recently. I think Pew did this one, which was so good, because some polling is amazing to talk about how polarized we've become, maybe because of polling. It was something like they asked Republicans what percentage of Democrats were gay or LGBT, and they said like 35%. and the reverse of asking Democrats how many Republicans you think make over $250,000 or more, and they also said like 35%. And the right answer to both is like 2%. And like the fact that it warps our view so much because of this stripping, and it wasn't. I mean, the history of polling is fascinating, and it's not a good one. It's really, I don't think, a conducive practice to healthy democracies that I think we were bound to become polarized this way.
So polling's like polling is like democracy itself. It's like it's the least imperfect system you have, but it's it's what you have. I mean,
polls influence other polls. Right. Polls influence the media.
Yeah, influence the media, and the media loves it.
It's a cat chasing its own tail like this.
And as sort of the thought experiment, imagine, and I don't know which one's even better, but imagine politician A who has zero polling data because it's illegal in the country or something, and they got elected because we liked him and we thought he would do a good job, and then we trust him to do a good job. And in 4 years, we'll let you know what we thought. And so a difficult thing comes across his desk. Let's say it's like gay marriage or legalizing marijuana or something. And they have a strong belief in it. And they vote with their conscience because they're like, well, they trusted me to do the job and I'm going to do the job. And they vote whatever they vote in Congress. And then in 4 years, they get voted out or they get kept in there, versus the situation of like, oh shit, something difficult came across my desk. What did my constituents say? I have to poll all of this kind of stuff. Oh, they want me to vote this way. I might vote that way because I want to get reelected. Again, you might like that. It's more of the direct democracy kind of model that all of this polling data is trying to turn the knobs in the brains of the people who are wanting to get reelected with that incentive. I don't know if this is a better world. We shouldn't. Okay, maybe I'm just not a populist. I don't want to live in a direct democracy. I don't want that. I want more of the first world where we can trust politicians to try. It's maybe a little more.
The founding fathers.
Nobody wanted to direct. No one wanted this amount.
That's why they didn't want it. That's why we have 2 houses of Congress, and that's why we have the Electoral College. There's other reasons too, but
I think there's a middle. I think if you just have the House of Representatives. And then you've got, I don't think because the Senate really goes in the other extreme, right?
Well, that was the whole point. That was the whole point. Yeah.
At that point it was, but at that point, California didn't have a larger population than all of Canada.
Look who's president right now.
I know. So we got to wrap this up. We've got about 3 to 5 minutes left. So I want to actually have the last comment. I know a lot of you commented. I'm sorry I couldn't get to everybody, but Kevin Lowe, there's a 2-part thing. He says, intuition tends to be predictive to some degree, but not as predictive as careful probabilistic modeling. Jay's going to love this. It's all probabilistic, so either could be wrong, but polling models are more likely a priori. And then he continues, and he says, so he has the intuition. Kevin has the intuition that Trump is going to win. So, over there, he agrees with you, Spitz. But he's saying intuition should only be embraced when you don't have time to analyze something carefully, in my opinion. So I don't embrace my intuitive feeling that Trump is likely to win. I just acknowledge it.
No, I don't think he thinks Trump's going to win. He's just acknowledging that he
he has fear.
But he's maybe
he has fear. Well, I mean, I don't know. I'm going to take him at his word. But
the only thing I would counter really quickly to my point of view, since I am in the minority, is again the non-repeatability.
Like the Senate.
The non-repeatability. Trump is like finely tuned, like the essential cosmological parameters that enable matter to exist, right? He's an amazing phenomena of these unlikely factors coming in. And my argument, and it's not to dismiss polling, but it's to link this idea of intuition, of non-repeatability with why I think this is an exceptional election, is that feeling and that cognitive sensibility that it's special. And when you have special circumstances, then things are broken. It's a new way of looking at things. So, Apple didn't do any market research for the iPhone. Steve Jobs just felt in his gut that that's what people wanted. Yeah. The old thing is like Henry Ford said, if you ask people what they want, they're going to say a faster horse. So that's my point of view. Essentially here in a nutshell it's like we live in extraordinary circumstances with an extraordinary kind of leader in the White House right now. And a lot of the traditional mechanisms of determining the electorate's sensibility are a little bit skewed. And that's
totally
Jobs also said, he said people don't know what they want until you show it to them, which is actually one of
that's my point of view is I'm not trying to skew it one way or another, and I'm not trying to mix the analysis with belief. But my fundamental point of view is that we live in unprecedented times that demand unprecedented ways of looking at it, and we might be in for some surpries in only a few days. And we'll see. The numbers.
I think I can agree with that.
Yeah.
So let's finish by saying I wanted to get from all three of us your most wildest prediction. So speaking of intuition, just one really a quick thing that you think is going to happen on election day that you kind of feel is going to happen, even though you may not want to say it out loud because you could be wrong. So Jay, any wild prediction, any aspect of it, any one state or anything like that?
A wild prediction. Hold on.
That you just have an intuitive sense about.
I think, I don't know. I'm just feeling fairly confident about a lot of it at the moment. I don't think he's going to win Texas. I'm not going to go that far. I think maybe does this considered a wild prediction that nobody will call the election on election night, that Fox News won't even do it? Maybe that's not wild enough. Maybe we're all just sort of agreeing.
No, that's not wild. I think that's like pretty much a consensus.
All right. I think Biden's going to win by a fucking lot. And we're going to feel a lot better on election night than we're all feeling. I don't know if that's a wild prediction. I don't think there's going to be any the states that are sort of in question. I think he'll win Pennsylvania. I think he's going to. Iowa seems like it's the big one, right? If he could actually pull off Iowa, that would be a big upset. I don't even think he'll go that far.
Russell's also saying if you believe polls are right, then we should know the results on November 3rd.
No, but that's a counting question. It's a counting question. In the polls, I'm not sure how much of that breaks down in different ways. But yeah, I think we are. My prediction is that on election night, when we go to sleep, we're going to be like, these agencies are just being weenies. They could totally call it if they weren't so damn afraid of, getting it wrong this time. But this would take a miracle.
I agree with that. I think that we're going to, once we get a few counties in Florida and we get a couple of results in Ohio I think we're going to know where this is going. But aside from your prediction that Trump is going to win,
my small p prediction is that Trump is going to win by only a handful of electoral votes. Is going to trigger all this contentious shit afterwards, and the Democrats will take both houses. So we're going to look at a Trump win with the Democrats controlling both houses. He'll squeak and like I mentioned at the beginning, it's going to be by hook and by crook. That's my small p prediction. And my wild ass crazy prediction, like you're saying, is that Biden in an absolute fucking landslide. I can happily negate all of my gut feelings. And then early in the evening, we're just going to see it's going to hit right like the polls, and it'll be a blue wave and la, la, la. And then, and then we'll have to deal with the moral licensing and backlash of that reality.
I think it would be funny if Trump squeaked out the win with just a couple of electoral votes, and then it's the Democrats taking everything to the courts and doing the legal challenge.
But I think it's going to be razor thin, but my wild ass crazy prediction is you guys are totally fucking right. And it's just a complete avalanche. And the whole country repudiates this motherfucker. We can start over again, and God bless America.
This isn't a wild prediction because I don't think it could happen exactly this way. But the version that I'm kind of hoping for is that Trump does have these legal challenges and it does get to the Supreme Court. Because I am sure, as much as I dislike her ideologically, if Amy Barrett gets to decide and say, fuck you, I'm not overturning the election, I think that would actually happen. As much as I disagree with her on so much ideologically and philosophically.
Yeah, I don't think she's going to go there. Yeah.
If it went to the point where Trump was clearly trying to get like states overthrown and it got to the Supreme Court, and Amy Barrett was the one who was like the hero. It depends
on the law, though, Jay. She's an originalist. So if it says that according to the governors, you have to listen to the governors. Yeah. And if the governors contest it, they'll just say it's contested.
But that would probably be in Biden's favor, because I'm guessing it would be like Michigan or something. But if it's Florida, you never know.
That's what I mean. That's what I mean.
If it's Florida,
I actually, when I saw the hearing, like her confirmation hearing, she comes across as, I could disagree with her on everything, and I think she's very evasive, but she's not a dumb woman. She comes across as a really sort of, she seems really accomplished and knows her stuff. So I also don't think, I don't think that anybody who's associated with Trump is as insane and unethical as he is. I actually don't think she's unethical, and this is weird saying this as an atheist, is that I think that it might be a lot of times, people who are religious and they want to do the right thing, like they often do it because they're religious. It's strange.
What's
my prediction?
Your wild ass prediction, right?
My wild ass prediction is what the one that Jay wasn't going to say is. I think Biden wins Texas.
Texas? That would be wild.
I think I had to, because I have to have fun. I have to have fun. I know it's unlikely.
You're gonna smoke the hoobie jubie there.
I don't know. I'm looking at the early voting numbers and everything. For some reason, I that would be wild. I think that's why it's a wild prediction. But because if he wins Texas, it's fucking. That means you're looking at a landslide.
Yeah. So then our two predictions are similar.
Yeah. There you go. All right, man. Okay, guys, gentlemen, this was great.
All right, we will just see all this is a moot point, right? And going back to the numbers, Jay.
Yeah.
The numbers come in. The numbers are going to come in. So it's ultimately evidence based, right?
Yeah.
So
I hope so. If we can get the numbers, that's all I want. Let's see the data. Let's see.
Or if their numbers are counted that we do get, that's my concern. We're going to see the numbers, but they're not all going to count.
Yeah, probably. And I'm excited to get those numbers and talk to you again about what we got right or what we got wrong.
Yeah, that'd be very interesting. We'll see.
And talk about something else too. Start talking about all the other stuff that we used to talk about before the show.
Unless Trump wins. Unless Trump.
Oh God! No, if he wins, like I'm done. What are you gonna do? What are you gonna do?
Right.
You can talk about stuff in there. So anyway, it seems like this was a lot of fun, and this is it. Hopefully, the next time we talk, this is not an issue anymore. There's not an issue anymore. But I'll be texting you guys on election night and stuff. We'll be watching it.
All right, we can do a debrief follow up, especially if it's wacky tobacco. We just got a compliment from my brother-in-law. He's saying this was fun, way better than Fox. That's, thank you for the high standard and high expectations that you have. I appreciate it. All right, guys. Cool. Okay, take care. We'll see you next time. And so much. Hey,
November 3rd.
Yeah.
Okay.